It's the real news. I'm Aaron Matek. President Donald Trump continues his first foreign trip in office with a stop in Israel. Trump arrived on the first ever open direct flight to Israel from his first stop, Saudi Arabia. After landing, Trump said he sees an opportunity for peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
We have before us a rare opportunity to bring security and stability and peace to this region and to its people, defeating terrorism and creating a future of harmony, prosperity, and peace.
After meeting with Israeli leaders today, Trump is set to meet with Palestinian counterpart Mahmoud Abbas in the occupied West Bank on Tuesday. Palestinians are staging a general strike today in solidarity with Palestinian prisoners in their 6th week of a hunger strike in Israeli prisons. Joining me is Ali Abunimah, co-founder of the electronic Intifada. Ali, welcome.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi. So a lot of people are remarking that it's unusual for a sitting president to visit Israel so early into his first term. Trump arriving there just, after being in office for only a few months. What's your take on this visit by President Trump?
This is part of a massive international roadshow, which I'm sure that Trump is hoping will distract from his deepening domestic political crisis. The visit to Israel is, of course, part of a bigger realignment or re-emphasis on aligning the United States firmly behind its client regimes in the Gulf and Israel, who are in an ever closer alignment and potentially escalating confrontation with Iran with possibly disastrous consequences for the region. And of course, selling unprecedented amounts of weapons into the region, which is already one of the most weaponized and heavily armed in the world, while talking about making peace and ending violence. So that's the big context. Hard to satirize such an absurd set of circumstances and realities.
Can you talk about the context on the Palestinian side? Just as Trump visits Israel today, there is a general strike going on in solidarity with the hunger strike, which, as I mentioned, is now in its 6th week. You had protests today, Israeli soldiers firing bullets on Palestinians, more than 1,000 people marching to a checkpoint in the West Bank. What is the context right now for what's happening inside Palestinian society as it receives President Trump?
The context is what it's been for decades, which is a brutal Israeli grip on the Palestinian people, a deepening occupation, a deepening settler colonialism and theft of Palestinian land, and Palestinians resisting, by all legitimate means, including the hunger strike. 1,500 Palestinian prisoners among the 6,000 Palestinian political prisoners in Israel's jails. Now, over a month of hunger strike, many of them have been transferred to hospitals in a grave condition. And all of this is absent from the reporting that we see in mainstream American media, which talks about Trump's visit to Israel as if none of this is happening. The Palestinians have been, the reality that Israel is imposing on them, have been almost invisible from how Trump's visit is being portrayed. Even more absurd, you have Jason Greenblatt, the negotiations envoy of Trump, who's supposedly working to restore peace negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, who publicly thanked Israel on Twitter for measures allegedly meant to help the Palestinian economy. Nothing could be more surreal than to claim that Israel is helping Palestinians. Israel helping Palestinians is as credible as Saudi Arabia fighting extremism and terrorism, which is another absurd message coming out of Trump's trip.
Yeah, Ali, on the issue of satire that you mentioned before, I want to read you one headline. This is from the New York Times. As Trump arrives in Israel, his deal-making skills face a test.
Well, that is such a typical New York Times headline. You know, it reminds me of all those headlines about Obama, killing extrajudicial killings by drone, test Obama's principles. I mean, you always see the word test in a headline where there is just a glaring contradiction they're trying to conceal or reconcile. In this case, of course, I mean, what deal-making skills? We've seen Trump uh, in office now for 4 months, and he hasn't been able to pass any legislation or make any significant achievements based on his promise. And the other thing is what this headline does. It plays into a narrative that has been pushed very much by U.S. media that the Israel-Palestine issue is this mystical thing that just needs the right negotiator or the right skills or the right person to come along. It's just a question of finding the magic formula. And that is a narrative that obscures and erases the material realities of military occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid. It is delusional or dishonest, and usually both, to talk about peace or reaching a peace agreement without talking about the root reasons why peace is absent, which is the fact that for decades now, 69 years, Palestinians have been dispossessed, deprived of their most basic rights, and the notion that that Trump can be a peace broker while doubling down on U.S. support, political, military, and economic, for Israel's occupation of apartheid it's absurd. But it passes without notice in the U.S. media, who talk about the U.S. as an honest broker and completely overlook, because there is this bipartisan consensus that the U.S. should continue to support Israel's occupation, apartheid, and settler colonialism to the hilt. So you can have these absurd notions existing side by side.
Ali, on that issue of the bipartisan consensus behind U.S. policy toward Israel, in Saudi Arabia, after President Trump sold, all those, arrived there and announced this massive weapons sale to Saudi Arabia, some $350 billion over 10 years. A lot of people started, on the Democratic side, expressed outrage, as if saying Trump is rewarding a human rights abuser, conveniently forgetting that President Obama did the same thing, sold them also, I think, over $100 billion in weapons. One of the people who made this criticism was Samantha Power, who was previously refusing to criticize Saudi Arabia as President Obama was arming them. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that dynamic as it pertains to Israel as well, whether for people who might say, oh, Trump is upending President Obama's efforts to make peace with Israel and the Palestinians. How do you respond to that?
Well, what's grotesque about Samantha Power's speaking out now is that for 2 years, Saudi Arabia, with other Gulf client states, has been bombing to smithereens Yemen, the poorest Arab country, and causing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. More than 12,000 civilians killed, a rapidly spreading cholera outbreak, widespread famine. Yemen has been under siege for 2 years by Saudi Arabian forces. All of this is utterly pointless. There's no reason for it. But it has been done with the full participation of the United States under Obama and under Trump. And of course, other US client states like Great Britain, which have been providing arms and other support to Saudi Arabia. So the Democrats have absolutely no basis whatsoever to criticize Trump. It was Obama who first supported the Saudi war, and it's as grotesque for Trump to go to Saudi Arabia and sell even more weapons to this regime, given the atrocities that it's committing in Yemen, and of course, its own domestic human rights record. And, the same goes for Israel, in the sense that if we're going to hear any criticism of Trump with regard to Israel from the Democrats, it's going to be that he's not pro-Israel enough, and that Obama was even more pro-Israel. And so far, that's true in the sense that Obama signed the memorandum that increased U.S. military aid to Israel to record levels. Starting from next year, it will reach $3.8 billion a year. And of course, Trump is very likely to stick to that as well. And I don't think we'll hear Democrats criticizing it.
Okay, Ali, on this point, let's stay on the issue of bipartisan consensus, but apply it to Israel. It's said that, inside Israel, critics of Benjamin Netanyahu, sort of more from the center, say that he's an obstacle to peace, and we need parties like Labor in Israel who are serious about making peace with Palestinians. And I want to read you a quote from Tzipi Livni, who was a former foreign minister of Israel, known as a moderate. And she recently wrote a letter to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz complaining about an article that was critical of Israeli government settlements. And she was making the argument that Israel and her government stood against settlements, but she specifically said that she's against settlement outposts, not the main settlement blocks. So she writes, what we did is go to Ma'ale Adumim, and Ma'ale Adumim is one of the major settlement blocks in the West Bank, to tell its residents that while the blocks have to be part of Israel under any agreement, the Israelis living there are being held hostage by the more isolated settlements. We explained that insistence on every single settlement, no matter how isolated, and the legalization of illegal outposts like Amona ultimately undermine Ma'ale Adumim. The way to persuade the world that the blocks are part of Israel is to advance the principle of two states for two peoples. So this idea that those considered the opposition are arguing that we have to keep the main settlement blocks, that's not an issue, but we're just against these isolated outposts. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, it's part of a giant bait and switch. Of course, Tzipi Livni is presented as this so-called moderate. Let's remember that she is, in fact, an international war crimes fugitive. Most recently, she canceled a visit to Belgium in the past few months because prosecutors in that country wanted to question her related to war crimes in Gaza in 2008, 2009, when she was foreign minister in the Israeli government. But since then, she's become a darling of the Arab regimes. She's been on the forefront of the rapprochement or the love affair between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is based on common enmity towards Iran and common support for extremist and jihadist groups in Syria. And Livni represents this so-called, labor Zionist or traditional, she comes from the Likud, but she now represents this traditional liberal Zionist view that Israel can only continue to survive with the creation of a Palestinian state. But the Palestinian state that she and others like her envisage is, what amounts to a Bantustan, where Israel would keep the large settlement, so-called large settlement blocks, as you described them. But also, Livni has gone further by saying that there should actually be population exchanges where Palestinian citizens of Israel are traded for the settlements and then are stripped of their Israeli citizenship and are kind of shunted into this Palestinian Bantustan. But that's what passes now for moderation. So far to the right, Israel's political spectrum has moved. But you still see people like Livni feted in international forums. She was at the Davos gathering at the Dead Sea in Jordan in recent days, which caused outrage among people in Jordan who object, of course, to having an Israeli official, much less a war criminal like Tzipi Livni, welcomed with open arms as she was on Jordanian soil. So it shows also the severe limits of the debate, whether it's in this country or in Israel, about the parameters for what people call peace. It is to the total exclusion of real and fundamental Palestinian rights.
Okay, Alec, as we end, I want to end with just some news. This is according to the Middle East Eye, and it's on the issue of Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. The Middle East Eye reports Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas will be presenting a plan that involves the Palestinians giving up 6.5% of their lands to Israel, 3 times as much as previously offered during Donald Trump's trip. And they quote a source who revealed this, saying, the Palestinian side will be presenting a new vision which is quite detached from that of the majority of the Palestinian people. Your comment on that?
I haven't seen that report, but it wouldn't surprise me. Abbas and his entourage, who, as you said, do not represent Palestinians at all, have shown themselves repeatedly willing to concede fundamental Palestinian rights. They, in the past, as the Palestine Papers showed in 2011, were willing to concede to Israel most of the settlements, what chief negotiator called the biggest Yerushalayim in history. Abbas himself has gone on record repeatedly saying he's willing to give up the right of return for Palestinian refugees. Let's remember the Palestinian Authority exists because Israel allows it to exist. It continues to exist to provide a service to Israel of policing the Palestinians and reducing the cost of occupation for Israel. And it is run by a very small elite who has no reason to continue to exist except for these so-called negotiations, and is determined to inherit and become the ruling elite of a so-called Palestinian state at any price, including the price of sacrificing the most fundamental Palestinian rights, and doing so at a time when Palestinian prisoners are hunger striking at the risk of their lives in order to protect those basic rights.
We have to leave it there. Ali Abunimah, co-founder of the Electronic Intifada. Ali, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.